You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter @RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am the Jacob Valk, except no imitation. I've got to start with the NFL. I'm not going to go too in-depth on Roethlisberger. I've spoken about him a ton already. You had a sense that this would be it. This doesn't really surprise anyone. I think we all wish him nothing but the best in retirement. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he got into coaching or broadcasting. I think he'd be very good at it. He's a surefire, first ballot Hall of Famer. You think about the three quarterbacks in the first round of the 2004 draft, the three big ones. Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger. Eli, not a great regular season record, great postseason record. Phillip Rivers, great regular season record, not a good postseason record. So there are people who make the case against both quarterbacks. Ben Roethlisberger, you marry the two together. It's the perfect combination. Great regular season record and great postseason record. The guy won 2 Super Bowls. I understand that he didn't win Super Bowl MVP. I understand that he probably wasn't the seminal reason for those wins. But he did make a great throw to Santonio Holmes in the Cardinals Super Bowl. That does mean something. Alright, he is part of an iconic moment. Ben Roethlisberger is a first ballot Hall of Famer. No question about that in my mind. It's going to be very interesting to see what the Steelers do to replace him. I find it very hard to believe that they'd roll with Mason Rudolph as their starter. Dwayne Haskins, I'd love to see get the opportunity, but I don't think that's going to happen. The Steelers have the cap flexibility to add a quarterback. At this very moment, according to overthecap.com, they have $34 million in cap room. So if they want to make a play for Deshaun Watson or Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson or anyone else who becomes available, they can do that. I know we've heard the rumors that they're going to draft a quarterback. They've been linked to Malik Willis. That would be an interesting fit. I'd be curious if they'd be open to moving up for Kenny Pickett. You know that Steelers fans would love to root for a quarterback coming out of the University of Pittsburgh. You know that that's a match made in heaven. Would it be a big trade up? The answer is yes. The Steelers have the 20th overall pick. To make sure they get Pickett, they'd probably have to leapfrog the Giants. I know Joe Shane said all the right things about Daniel Jones, but this is lying season. Alright, what do you want him to say? Yeah, we're going to trade Daniel Jones? That kills his leverage. I'm not saying that Jones won't be the Giants starter next year, but it's not lock, stock, and barrel that he will be. So maybe you try to move up to 4. I'll say this. If I'm Joe Douglas, I don't want to move down to 20. If I'm the Texans, I don't want to move down to 20. Like, even if Pickett gets past the Giants, if you're the Falcons, do you want to move down to 20? That's a big drop. That's a 12-pick drop. You're moving down from the top 10 to 20, where the playoff teams pick. I'm just not sure what the Steelers could offer to move up for Pickett. I think it's their ideal scenario. You know the fans would love it, but I think the smart money is on a guy like Malik Willis. Although I will say this, I don't think Willis is worthy of being a first rounder. I get the hype. Very similar to Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts. Alright, I totally get that, but over a guy like Sam Howell or Matt Corral, I don't see it. I don't think that would work out well for the Steelers. So it's certainly going to be interesting to follow what the Steelers do at quarterback. The NFL news that I really want to talk about is the first 2 head coaches being hired. And I'll go chronologically. The Broncos fired the first salvo. They hired Nathaniel Hackett to be their head coach. Before Hackett went to Denver, he was the Packers' offensive coordinator. He's been there since 2019. When Matt LaFleur got the Packers head coaching job, he made sure to hire Hackett away from the Jaguars. It's kind of funny because Hackett and LaFleur had never worked together before they got to Green Bay. So give LaFleur credit for being open to going outside his comfort zone. And look, it worked out. The Packers offense in the 3 years that Hackett was there has been nothing short of outstanding. Aaron Rodgers made the Pro Bowl all 3 years. The Packers had 13 wins each year, made it to the NFC title game in 2 out of those 3 years. Rodgers won an MVP last year, is probably going to win an MVP this year. I'm not saying that Nathaniel Hackett deserves all the credit for that success, but he's there. It does mean something. The thing that I really like about Hackett is what he did in Jacksonville. Hackett was the offensive coordinator of the 2017 Jaguars. That team was 1 quarter away from beating the Patriots and going to the Super Bowl. And Hackett had some success in Buffalo. He's been in the NFL for a really long time. His father is Paul Hackett, who I remember with the Jets. He was their offensive coordinator from 01 to 04. I really liked him. I think this can work. The thing is, though, I don't like that Hackett wasn't calling the plays in Green Bay. Matt LaFleur was. And look, at the end of the day, would Aaron Rodgers have been as successful without Nathaniel Hackett? Probably. No guarantee, but probably. And look, teams have hired coaches in Aaron Rodgers' world before. It really hasn't worked. Joe Philbin didn't set the world on fire with the Dolphins. There are some people in Dallas right now calling for Mike McCarthy's head. Ben McAdoo failed miserably with the Giants. It's like the Bill Belichick coaching tree. It doesn't work, so why do we keep hiring from there? I mean, what's to stop a guy like Hackett from failing just like McAdoo did, just like Philbin did? I mean, you can't tell me that Nathaniel Hackett was the best head coaching candidate out there. Now, the one thing I'll say is, I brought up the point that Rodgers probably would have been just as successful without Hackett. But you think about the big offensive coordinator names that we've heard bandied about in this cycle. Eric Bieniemy, Brian Daboll, Byron Leftwich. Who are their quarterbacks? Bieniemy's is Patrick Mahomes, Daboll's is Josh Allen, and Leftwich's is Tom Brady. How responsible are any of those guys for their quarterback success? Probably a little bit, but they're probably not the seminal reason. I mean, I love Daboll because he's really the leader of the Bills' offense. Sean McDermott's a defensive guy, so he delegates a lot to Daboll. And he's up there in the press box calling the plays. You know, Daboll, I think, is responsible for a pretty decent amount of the Bills' offense success. Bieniemy? Maybe a little bit. But it's not too hard to call plays for Patrick Mahomes. Byron Leftwich? Not too hard to call plays for Tom Brady. You know, I think that is something you need to keep in mind. That's why I was really fascinated with Brian Callahan, the Bengals offensive coordinator. I'm really surprised we haven't heard his name mentioned a ton. He only interviewed with one team this cycle, the Broncos. Well, obviously he's not getting that job. I'm just stunned that he didn't get another interview. Even a guy like Joe Lombardi, the Chargers offensive coordinator. He only had one interview this cycle with the Texans. It doesn't seem like he's going to get that job. It's just kind of interesting how things like that work out. But I do think Hackett will do a solid job with the Broncos. My buddy Anthony is a Broncos fan. The three finalists for this job were Hackett, Kevin O'Connell, the Rams offensive coordinator and former Jets quarterback, and Dan Quinn, Cowboys defensive coordinator. Anthony told me that he preferred Hackett to the other finalists. So an endorsement from Anthony, who follows the Broncos a lot closer than I do, means something to me. So look, I like Hackett. I do think he'll do a good job. I don't think this is a bad hire. by any stretch. Were there candidates who I liked more? The answer is yes. Not necessarily O'Connell and Quinn, but people who were ruled out early in the process, Bieniemy and Callahan. Matt Everfloos didn't even get an interview, which surprised the daylights out of me. Byron Leftwich didn't get an interview, surprised the daylights out of me. Luke Getsy, the Packers quarterbacks coach, got an interview. So you're casting a wide enough net that you interview the Packers quarterbacks coach to be your head coach. But you're not going to interview a guy like Everfloos or Leftwich. That's interesting. But you know what? It doesn't matter how you got to the right answer. You ended up getting to the right answer. Like I said, I really think Hackett will do a good job with the Broncos. And one other thing that deserves to be mentioned, George Paton just made his first head coaching hire. He inherited Vic Fangio. He kept him around for one more season. Obviously, Fangio got canned on Black Monday. You know, it would have been very easy for him to hire Mike Zimmer and say, I know Zimmer, I've worked with him for many years, he's a very smart guy, and I think he's going to do a great job here in Denver. We've seen GMs do that before. So the fact that Peyton went outside his comfort zone a little bit and hired Hackett, someone who he has no experience with, that's telling. That's a good job by Peyton. You know, it's okay when you're coming up with the list of names of who you want to talk to have a preconceived favorite. But if that preconceived favorite bombs in the interview and someone who you didn't expect rises to the top, who should you hire? The guy who rose to the top. So I applaud Peyton for going with someone who he has no working experience with. It shows that he's not married to the spoil system, which I like. I really think this is going to work out for the Broncos. Good job by them. Let's see what they do at quarterback now. Do they stick with Bridgewater for another year, or do they make a splash? It'll be very interesting to see what they do. I'll say this. I know Broncos fans have been angling for Aaron Rodgers for a while. What does Rodgers think of Hackett? Would you put it past Rodgers to force a trade to the Broncos? To say, I'm done in Green Bay, you failed to put a good roster around me, let me go to Denver where I know the head coach, I really like him, and I can throw passes to Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, and KJ Hamler. And Noah Fant, too. Think about the AFC West for a minute. If Rodgers goes to the Broncos, you'd have Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Derek Carr, and Aaron Rodgers in the same division. That would be absolutely incredible. It'll be very interesting to follow that situation. Moving on now to the Bears hiring Matt Everfloos as their head coach. And I love this hire. I have been a big proponent of Everfloos for a while. Everfloos has been with the Colts for 4 years as their defensive coordinator. And he's done a really good job every year. I mean, this guy has been a sexy head coaching candidate for a while. So to see him get a shot is really nice. And it's kind of funny. Think about how Everfloos got the job as Colts defensive coordinator. He made the leap when Josh McDaniels said he was going to go to the Colts. When McDaniels backed out, Everfloos had already signed the contract, so he was already there as the defensive coordinator. Frank Reich took over. Reich and Everfloos had never met. But Chris Ballard said to Reich, "You're really going to like Everfloos. Very smart guy. He knows what he's doing." So Reich kept him on. And it would have been very easy for the pressure to get to Everfloos. Because realize, if the Colts defense had bombed in 2018, Everfloos would have been the scapegoat. It would have been like, okay, that's it, you're gone, I'm bringing in my own guy as defensive coordinator. But the Colts defense stepped up and was always good with Everfloos calling plays. This guy is a great defensive mind. You think about the history of the Bears. What's the first thing that pops into your head? The monsters of the Midway. You think about the greatness of the 85 Bears defense. Without question, the greatest defense in NFL history. Only gave up 10 points in the playoffs. In 16 regular season games, giving up less than 200 points. That is insane. You think about guys like Richard Dent and Mike Singletary and Mongo McMichael, Otis Wilson, Dan Hampton, Dave Duerson. That's when the Bears were at their best. When their defense was fantastic. You can even go more recent if you want. In 2006, when the Bears were in the Super Bowl, their defense was the seminal reason that they got there. It wasn't Rex Grossman. It was a defense with guys like Brian Urlacher, Lance Briggs, Tommy Harris, Brendan Ayanbadejo, Peanut Tillman, Ricky Manning, Nate Vasher, etc., etc. That is when the Bears have been at their best. When their defense has been elite. They have tried the offense-first approach. It hasn't worked. So in steps Everfloos, a guy who, without question, was the most deserving defensive guy to be head coach. Dennis Allen had a chance already. He failed. Leslie Frazier had a chance already. He failed. Dan Quinn had a chance already. He failed. Todd Bowles had a chance already. He failed. So in steps Everfloos, someone who's never been a head coach before. Let's see what we have in him. This is an outstanding hire by Ryan Poles. And this is another example of a GM hiring someone who he has no experience with. Once again, I applaud the GM for that. Great job, Ryan Poles. great job recognizing the history of the Bears and hiring someone who his fan base can instantly gravitate to. I think that Everfloos is going to reinvigorate that Bears defense into being one of the best units in the league. I understand that it wasn't good last year, but I have full confidence in Everfloos' ability to fix it. The one thing I'll say is, because I always have to look at the cynical side of things, what's the most important thing to the Bears right now? If they're gonna make the playoffs sooner rather than later, what do they need to have happen? They need Justin Fields to live up to his potential. I mean, you can make the argument that hiring an offensive guy would have been the right move, if only to help Fields along. Having said that, though, if Everfloos brings in a strong offensive coordinator, there's no issue. It'll be very interesting to see who Everfloos brings in. Since he's a first-time head coach, would he look to bring in someone with head coaching experience? Someone like Bill O'Brien or Doug Peterson? I could see that happening. I wouldn't mind that. He could also bring someone with him from Indianapolis. Maybe a guy like Scott Milanovich, Colts quarterbacks coach, spent a lot of time in the CFL, was very successful there. I understand why Bears fans may be skeptical of that, because Mark Trestman came from the CFL and did not do a good job with the Bears. But I think Milanovich would make a little sense. Maybe a guy like Mike Groh, who's been an offensive coordinator before. The Eagles made the playoffs twice with him as their offensive coordinator. Obviously, he's Al Groh's son, so I like the bloodlines there. Was previously wide receivers coach for the Bears, so that homecoming aspect of things would be nice. Groh is currently the Colts wide receivers coach. Or maybe Everfloos wants to go a little outside the box. How about a guy like Scotty Montgomery? He's the Colts running backs coach. What was the best part of the Colts offense this year? Jonathan Taylor. I mean, I think there is something to be said about right when Montgomery gets there, Taylor takes off. That does mean something. I wouldn't mind Montgomery. I wouldn't mind him at all. Everfloos putting the right offensive staff in place can't be overstated. Because Justin Fields needs to work for Everfloos to stick with the Bears long term. If the defense is great, okay, fantastic. But if this quarterback, who the Bears invested 2 first-rounders into, doesn't work out, that's going to look really bad on Everfloos. He's got to bring in the right staff to get Fields to where he needs to get. But I do have faith in his ability to do that. Like I said, I like Everfloos a lot. Outstanding job by the Bears. Moving on now to something that isn't official official, but it's a very, very credible report. According to Mike Jurecki of azcardinals.com, the Jaguars are close to hiring Adrian Wilson as their GM and Byron Leftwich as their head coach. Why should we care about what someone from azcardinals.com has to say about the Jaguars? Adrian Wilson is the Cardinals' vice president of pro scouting. So no, this report means something. And you gotta love Urban Meyer messing up the Jaguars so much that not only does he not make it through this season, but his hand-picked GM, Trent Baalke, is out after 1 year. Doesn't even get a chance to hire his own head coach. In fact, the head coach is in essence bringing in his own GM. You gotta love when that happens, right? But the thing is, though, I think this can work. Look, Byron Leftwich did a great job as Buccaneers offensive coordinator. Failed miserably with the Cardinals in his 1 year there, but in his 3 years with the Buccaneers, their offense was sensational. It never ranked worse than third in the NFL in terms of points per game, seventh in the NFL in terms of yards per game, second in terms of passing yards per game, and third in terms of passing touchdowns per game. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, how responsible can Leftwich be for Tom Brady's success? Well, look, Leftwich is calling the plays. That does mean something. He just won a Super Bowl. That means something. And in 2019, Jameis Winston did throw for over 5,000 yards. He did throw 33 touchdowns. Chris Godwin and Mike Evans did have great seasons. I mean, it's clear that Leftwich has a good head on his shoulders. And also, the fact that he used to quarterback the Jaguars means something too. I mean, think about it. If you're a Jaguars fan and you're about 25, 30 years old, you grew up watching Byron Leftwich as your quarterback. Now, did Byron Leftwich set the world on fire with the Jaguars? The answer is no. But in 2005, the Jaguars did go 12-4. They did make the playoffs. Granted, they got destroyed by the Patriots 28-3 in the wild card round. But hey, you got to the playoffs. I mean, Byron Leftwich is arguably the third best quarterback in Jaguars history. I think you've got to put Mark Brunell 1, you've got to put David Garrard 2. It's close between Leftwich and Bortles. I could see the argument for Leftwich, but I could also see the argument for Blake Bortles. Also, I know what you're thinking. Has a former quarterback of a team gone back to that team as their head coach? The answer is yes. The results haven't been great. Just to run through the complete list, Bob Waterfield did not do a good job as Rams head coach. Bart Starr was a terrible Packers head coach. I could go way back. Frankie Albert with the 49ers. He wasn't awful, but didn't set the world on fire. The best example is probably Tom Flores, maybe Sam Weish. Flores coached the Raiders to 2 Super Bowls. Sam Weish coached the Bengals to a Super Bowl appearance. June Jones, when he was with the Falcons, didn't do a great job. It's really a mixed bag. But it's the kind of thing that can get Jaguars fans excited. And Lord knows Jaguars fans need something to be excited about. Alright, we know this. This is a team that can't get out of its own way. Under Shahid Khan's ownership, the Jaguars only have 1 winning season. Urban Meyer comes in with a ton of fanfare. I think everyone's excited to see what he can do in the NFL. And he becomes one of the worst coaches in NFL history. Makes Adam Gase look like Bill Walsh. I mean, if you're a Jaguars fan, you're clinging to something, anything, to get you excited. And I think this is a hire that you can get excited about. I do think that Leftwich will be able to develop Trevor Lawrence. In no way, shape, or form is he a lost cause. You know he'll get the running game going, whether it's with James Robinson, Travis Etienne, or someone else. I think Leftwich will do a really good job with the Jaguars. He was really the right hire for them from the get-go. And as far as Adrian Wilson becoming GM, you can't have a problem with that. I mean, Wilson knows the game inside and out. Obviously, he was a great safety. Alright, was a 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro. He's in the Cardinals Ring of Honor. Great player. Then after he retired, he went to the Cardinals and became a scout. Worked his way up the corporate ladder. And is now their vice president of pro scouting. Wilson has earned the right to be a GM. You'd be hard-pressed to find a better resume than Adrian Wilson's in terms of prospective GMs. Great player. Was involved in bringing in DeAndre Hopkins and J.J. Watt. Was there when the Cardinals replaced Josh Rosen with Kyler Murray. Brought in A.J. Green. I think this is a fantastic hire by the Jaguars. I'll say this, there's no obvious connection between Leftwich and Wilson. I'm sure that they played against each other at some point. But think about it. You now have 2 former players leading the Jaguars. Urban Meyer had very little playing experience. And obviously he struggled to connect with people, alienated a lot of people. I mean, you don't need me to rehash all his failures. We'll be here until next week. But when someone fails that badly you want to hire their opposite. Byron Leftwich is probably Urban Meyer's opposite. Adrian Wilson is probably Urban Meyer's opposite. I think this is going to work. If you're a Jaguars fan, if you're a Jaguars player, you've got to be really excited about these hires. And also, I'll say this. Byron Leftwich is the first black head coach to be hired this cycle. Before today, the NFL only had one black head coach. That was Mike Tomlin. Now, granted, 2 isn't much better, but at least it's not 1. Alright, it looks a little better. And the 5 teams that replaced GMs, of the 4 that have hired a new GM, only one of them didn't hire a black guy. The Giants hired Joe Schoen. Schoen is white. And that's okay. Alright, I'm not begrudging the Giants by any stretch, but I think it's important that the NFL, a predominantly black league, is getting more black men in positions of power. That does mean something. That's a good look for the NFL. They may get some more black head coaches before everything is said and done. You gotta think the guys like Brian Flores and Todd Bowles and Leslie Frazier and Eric Bieniemy are still in the mix. But again, I applaud the Jaguars for this pairing and having a black man as their GM and their head coach. That does mean something. Good job by them. Alright, now I'll give you some NHL Valk talk. And I'll start with the Penguins signing Jeff Carter to a 2-year extension worth $6.25 million per year. Let me ask you something. If I were to tell you a couple years ago that Jeff Carter would get an extension after his crazy contract with the Flyers ended, would you have believed me? Probably not, right? But give Carter credit. As soon as he got to the Penguins, he had a career renaissance. You know, there are some players who just, when they get to a different team, it's just a better system. They're playing with better players that better fit their skill set. And that can cause them to take a big jump. I mean, you think about who Carter's been playing with this year. He's been centering the Penguins' third line with Evan Rodriguez and Brock McGinn next to him. Brock McGinn is one of the most underrated players in the NHL. Killed the Islanders in the playoffs a few years ago. Really, really good two-way player. He has 10 goals in 39 games this year, 15 total points. And Evan Rodriguez has 32 points in 42 games. Let me tell you, that third line of the Penguins is a big part of why they're so good this year. You thought the Penguins would take a step back this year because of their disappointing playoff performance? They're 1 point behind the Rangers for the Metropolitan Division lead, and they have a game in hand. They are the second hottest team in the NHL. The Avalanche have won 8 straight. The Penguins have won 6 straight. Give Tristan Jarry a ton of credit. He's going to get Vezina Trophy votes this year. But this is a great job by the Penguins. Give Mike Sullivan a ton of credit for reinvigorating Jeff Carter. What he's done with the Penguins can't be overstated. For my money, he's the best head coach in Penguins history. The Penguins have won 5 Stanley Cups in their history. Their first one was won by Bob Johnson, who died right after the Penguins won that cup. Very, very sad. He was a really good coach. It's a shame that he's been lost to history. Scotty Bowman came in and led the Penguins to their second cup. Their third cup was won by Dan Bylsma. Their fourth and fifth cups were won by Mike Sullivan. So Sullivan has the most Stanley Cups in Penguins history, the most wins in Penguins history, the second most playoff wins in Penguins history, 2 behind Dan Bylsma. Sullivan is the GOAT of Penguins head coaches. Just a fantastically run organization. It wasn't always that way, though. Great interview that I did a couple years ago with Greg Enright. You can look that up. I had a lot of fun talking to him. And I emailed him right after the Islanders beat the Penguins in the playoffs. He got me back. He was a good sport about it. And you know what? If he would have emailed me, if the Penguins beat the Islanders, I would have deserved all the ribbing. Good guy. Very good guy. Moving on now to the Senators signing Nick Holden to a 1-year extension worth $1.3 million. And this is a little interesting. Holden has had a really bad year for the Senators. I understand that the Senators are a really bad team this year, but still, guys like Thomas Chabot and Artem Zub and Drake Batherson and Brady Tkachuk, Josh Norris, Tim Stützle, Connor Brown, etc., are all having good seasons. I don't really view that as an excuse. I mean, I'm just not sure why you'd want to lock him up. What do you see in Nick Holden? He has 4 points in 30 games. He's a -4. Yeah, sure, in the past he was a solid top 4 or top 6 defenseman. But he's 34. He's not getting any younger. His best days are way behind him. I'm just confused. Why would you want to lock him up? Couldn't you find someone better in free agency? Or wouldn't you want to clear the way for some younger players? Maybe a guy like Lassie Thompson or Eric Brandstrom? I'm not giving up on him yet. It's a confusing move. It's only for 1 year. It's $1.3 million. I can't bang tables over it, but I can't endorse it either. It's a confusing deal for the Senators. Speaking of a bad Canadian hockey team, the Montreal Canadiens are in the news. According to Elliot Friedman of Sportsnet, several teams are pursuing Ben Sherratt. And let me tell you, Sherratt could help a lot of teams. He's been misused by the Canadiens. His stats aren't indicative of his talent. He's playing over 20 minutes a night. He's like their top defenseman. That's not how Ben Sherratt should be used. Ben Sherratt is a top 4 defenseman. And that's okay. you can carve out a very nice niche for yourself as a top 4 defenseman. It's what he did with the Jets a while back. I mean, I like Sherratt. Solid two-way defenseman. If you're not a Jacob Chikrin fan, like I'm not, look to a guy like Sherratt. Someone who plays for a bad team, an older player, so you know that the Habs wouldn't be opposed to moving on from him. He's on the last year of his deal, so you will have to re-sign him, but that can also be construed as a good thing. You're not locked into a big contract if he doesn't work out. You're not beholden to him going forward. But I think Sherratt could help a lot of teams. He's a solid player. I think he'll be moved well before the deadline. Honestly, a second rounder wouldn't surprise me. A third I'd be more comfortable with if I was an opposing GM, but I wouldn't get mad at a second. Also, according to Friedman, the Edmonton Oilers are looking at adding a new goalie. And basically every goalie under the sun was mentioned by Friedman. Jonas Korpisalo, Braden Holtby, Anton Khudobin, Martin Jones, Ilya Samsonov, and Vitek Vanachek. Also, I saw someone mention Semyon Varlamov. It wasn't Friedman. I don't remember who. I mean, I've said in the past that I'd be open to moving on from Varlamov, but with the Islanders playing better hockey as of late, I could understand them not wanting to give up their backup goalie. And yes, Varlamov is their backup goalie. Sorokin's the starter, Varley's the backup. It's not 1A, 1B anymore. It's Sorokin, then Varley. I mean, I'll say this, if the Oilers bowled me over with an offer, I wouldn't be opposed to it, because I don't think the Islanders are making the playoffs. But I can understand the Islanders not wanting to give Varley away right now. In the offseason, yes, clear cap room. And obviously in the offseason, it's easier to add a backup goalie. But now I understand them not wanting to move on from Varley. There is no question that goalie is the biggest hole that the Oilers have. You want to tell me their depth is an issue? Yeah, no question. It's been that way for a while in the McDavid and Draisaitl era. But I think goalie is a bigger issue. Mikko Koskinen has done a terrible job. Mike Smith did a bad job. Stuart Skinner's not terrible, but he's not great. If you're looking to make a Stanley Cup run, do you really want Stuart Skinner as your goalie? The answer is no. And the thing is, I don't see how the Oilers can improve their goalie situation. Out of all the guys that I mentioned, only 4 are worth pursuing. Varley, Holtby, and the 2 Capitals goalies. I'm not a Jonas Korpisalo fan. He has failed miserably with the Blue Jackets recently. Anton Khudobin is having a dreadful season. I understand that the Oilers goalie coach may say, you know what, I can fix him. Give me a chance, I'll make him work. But that's a big gamble. And Martin Jones just isn't that good. He's really fallen off the last few years. Now, Varley I already hit on. The Islanders aren't going to want to trade him if they're making a playoff push. The same thing holds for Holtby and the Capitals goalies. The Stars are in the playoff mix. They're tied with the Flames and Sharks for the final wildcard spot in the West. Do you really see them trading Braden Holtby? I mean, I understand that they're probably going to roll with Jake Ottinger in the playoffs, but realize, if something happens to Ottinger, you're left with Khudobin. For the same reason that the Islanders wouldn't want to trade Varley right now, I don't see the Stars wanting to trade Holtby. Now, the two Capitals goalies, Samsonov and Vanachek, are interesting. Because the Capitals do have a third goalie that they can call up, and I wouldn't be opposed to him being the backup. Zach Fucale, in limited time for the Caps, looked great. He started 3 games, went 1-1-1, had a .924 save percentage, and a .175 goals against. He pitched a shutout in his first ever NHL game against the Red Wings. Nearly pitched a shutout against the Wild in his second start in the NHL. But the Caps lost in a shootout. He got creamed by the Bruins a couple weeks ago. So he's now in the AHL. But if the Capitals were to move on from Samsonov or Vanachek, I'd have no problem with calling up Fucale and saying he's the backup going forward. I think he could do that. He's been in the AHL since 15-16, so he certainly paid his dues. Once upon a time, he was a very highly thought of goalie prospect. I remember really liking him in the 13 draft. Needless to say, it didn't work out with the Canadiens, but I could see him being the Capitals' backup. I think that could work. It brings up the question, who would you rather trade, Samsonov or Vanachek? I think my answer would be Samsonov, just because he's 2 years younger. I mean, statistically, they're very similar. Samsonov is 13-5-3 with a .903 save percentage and a .279 goals against. He has 3 shutouts. Vanachek is 9-6-5 with a .912 save percentage and a .247 goals against. Take your pick. If the Capitals like Vanachek more, trade Samsonov. I have no problem with that. But I think I'd rather roll with Samsonov. I'm not opposed to the Capitals trading either one of them. The Oilers should be very aggressive in trading for Samsonov or Vanachek. There's no question about that. Trading for one of them gives them the best chance possible to win a Stanley Cup. I do want to talk about a really sad death in the baseball world, and that is the passing of Gene Clines, who died today at the age of 75. It's okay if you don't know the name Gene Clines. Not exactly a household name, but he was a very good outfielder. He had a career that anyone would be proud of. Wickedly fast, could play all 3 outfield positions. Just an all-around good player. His rookie season was with the 1971 Pirates. The 71 Pirates had a full outfield. Willie Stargell in left, Al Oliver in center, and Roberto Clemente in right. It doesn't get much better than that. But Clines got into 97 games and hit .308 and stole 15 bags. On September 1st of that year, he was part of history. He was part of the first ever all-minority starting lineup in MLB history. Clines batted second and played center field. He went 2 for 5 in that game. Had a single, a double, and stole a bag. The Pirates won 10-7. They beat the Phillies. The 71 Pirates destroyed the Giants in the NLCS that year. And in a really good World Series that went 7 games, the Pirates won Game 7 2-1. The year after that, Clines carved out more of a consistent role for himself. He hit .334 and stole 12 bags, and actually got some MVP votes. The Pirates won the NL East. They went up against the Reds in the NLCS, losing a decisive Game 5, 4-3. You can thank Dave Justy for that loss. In 74, Clines took a step back with the bat, but still stole 14 bags. The Pirates won the NL East. They went up against the Dodgers in the NLCS, but they lost in 4 games. After that, he was traded to the Mets for Duffy Dyer, who was a solid backup catcher. All glove, no bat. Clines didn't do much for the Mets. He only lasted a year there before being traded to the Rangers for Joe Lovitto. You don't need to know anything about Joe Lovitto. With the Rangers, Clines had a good season. He had .276 with 11 steals. But the 76 Rangers were not a good team. They finished 10 games under 500. Clines finished his career with the Cubs as a backup outfielder. In 77, he hit .293. In 78, he hit .258. Look, the guy played for 10 seasons and finished with a .277 average. That's a career that anyone would be proud of. Not a Hall of Famer by any stretch, but a career that he could look back at and say, you know what, I made it. And he has a World Series ring, too. He stayed with the Cubs after he retired. He was their first base coach. Then he went into the Astros minor league system. Spent a year as their hitting coach. Bounced around a few teams as a hitting coach before landing with the Giants in 97. In answer to your next question, yes, Gene Clines was the hitting coach for the 01 Giants. Obviously, that was the year that Barry Bonds hit 73 home runs. And yes, he was the hitting coach in 02 when the Giants were 1 win away from a World Series. Obviously, they had the epic collapse in Game 6. They're up 5-0 after 6.5 innings. Then the Angels outscored them 6-0. Bonds had the big error. It's actually kind of funny. Game 6 of the 0-2 World Series was on MLB Network early in the pandemic. And my father didn't remember the game. So I said, you know what, let's watch it. It's a great game. You'll like it. So, okay, he watched it. The MLB Network gave away the result in, the lead up to the game. In their promo for the game before the broadcast started, they said this is what happened. It was so dumb. It's wait a minute, why are we watching it? You know what happened. So stupid. Clines followed Dusty Baker to the Cubs. He was the first base coach for the Cubbies in 2003. Obviously, that year had the Steve Bartman game. The year after that, Clines stayed as Cubs first base coach. Then he spent the next 2 years as their hitting coach. When Dusty Baker retired, he went to the Dodgers and stayed involved for a long time. This guy loved baseball. Like I said, this guy had a career that anyone would be proud of. You don't need to be an all-star or a Hall of Famer to have a career that you can look back on and say, you know what? I'm proud of what I accomplished. If you last in the sport for a long time, 10 years as a player, and over 15 years as a coach, that's pretty impressive. May he rest in peace. Tomorrow I'm going to preview the 2 NFL conference title games. I'll give you all the good stuff that comes with that. Until then, I'm Jacob Valk, and always remember, if you disagree with me, you're wrong.